The planet you're sitting on right now is 4.5 billion years old. Say that number out loud and it sounds almost meaningless. Too big to feel, too long to picture. But every second of that time actually happened. Every one of those years left a mark. And the story they tell is the strangest, most violent, most beautiful thing you've never been taught properly. Because what happened on this rock, from the moment it was born out of fire and collision to the moment you pressed play on this video, is not a calm, orderly progression. It's a chaos of catastrophe and reinvention. A planet that has been frozen solid, boiled alive, smashed from space, poisoned by its own atmosphere, and wiped nearly clean of life, not once, but over and over again. And every single time, something crawled out of the wreckage and started again. This is the full story of Earth, all 4.5 billion years of it. From a ball of molten rock to you, and I promise you, you are not ready for how strange it gets. Let's start at the very beginning. Before there was land, before there was water, before there was anything at all. 4.5 billion years ago, there was no Earth. There was just a cloud, an enormous spinning disk of gas and dust orbiting a young star. And inside that cloud, something was happening. Tiny grains of rock and metal were colliding, sticking together, growing. Pebbles became boulders, boulders became mountains, and those mountains, pulled together by their own gravity, smashed into each other with unimaginable violence, until they formed a ball of molten rock, glowing red in the dark of space. That was the birth of Earth. And it was not gentle. The early planet was a hellscape, a world scientists call the Hadean, named after Hades, the ancient god of the underworld. There was no solid ground. The surface was an ocean of molten lava, glowing orange and red, radiating heat into space. The atmosphere was a choking blanket of carbon dioxide and steam, with no oxygen anywhere. If you could somehow stand on this world, you'd be vaporized before your first breath. And then something truly extraordinary happened. Another planetary body, roughly the size of Mars, slammed into the young Earth. The impact was so catastrophic that it partially melted the entire planet and flung a massive ring of debris into orbit. That debris slowly coalesced, pulled together by gravity, and formed the Moon. Our Moon, the same one you can see tonight, was born from the most violent collision in Earth's history. After that impact, the planet slowly began to cool. The lava surface hardened into the first fragile crust of solid rock, thin, unstable, constantly cracking and remelting. And as the temperature dropped further, something happened that would change everything. The steam in the atmosphere began to condense. It rained, not for hours, not for days, for millions of years. A rain so long and so heavy that it filled every low point on the surface and created the first oceans. The hellscape was drowning itself, and from that water, eventually, impossibly, life would begin. Somewhere in those ancient oceans, around 3.8 billion years ago, something stirred. We don't know exactly how, and we may never know, but chemistry crossed a line and became biology. The first living things appeared, microscopic, impossibly simple, nothing more than tiny single cells drifting in the warm, dark water. No eyes, no mouths, no brains, just the raw ability to copy themselves and keep going. It doesn't sound like much, but those tiny, brainless specks did something that would reshape the entire planet in ways nothing else ever has. For over 1 billion years, life stayed small, invisible. Single cells in a vast ocean, under skies with almost no oxygen. The air was unbreathable. The land was barren rock, blasted by ultraviolet radiation, completely lifeless. Earth was an ocean world ruled by microbes, and it looked like it might stay that way forever. Then came the revolution. A new kind of microbe evolved. Cyanobacteria. They looked like nothing, just blue-green slime floating in shallow water. But they had learned a trick that would change the course of history: photosynthesis. They could eat sunlight and exhale oxygen. At first, the oxygen they produced was absorbed by the iron dissolved in the oceans, rusting the seas red. For hundreds of millions of years, every molecule of oxygen was swallowed up before it could reach the atmosphere. But the cyanobacteria didn't stop. They kept pumping, and eventually, the oceans couldn't absorb any more. The oxygen broke through into the air, and it was a catastrophe. Because to almost every living thing on Earth at that time, oxygen was poison. This event, the Great Oxidation Event, roughly 2.4 billion years ago, was the first mass extinction in history, and it was caused not by an asteroid or a volcano, but by life itself. The planet's own biology poisoned its own atmosphere and killed almost everything that was alive. But from that poisoned world, something new emerged. Life that could breathe the oxygen. Life that could use it as fuel, burning it for energy in ways the old microbes never could. And with that energy came complexity. Cells grew larger. Cells merged with other cells, swallowing them whole and keeping them alive inside as tiny internal engines. These were the first complex cells, the ancestors of every animal, every plant, every fungus that would ever exist. For another billion years, a stretch scientists literally call the boring billion, not much seemed to happen. But underneath that apparent stillness, the machinery of complex life was being assembled, piece by piece, in the dark. And then, without warning, it exploded. Around 540 million years ago, after billions of years of almost nothing visible to the naked eye, life went from microscopic simplicity to staggering complexity in what feels like the blink of an eye. This is the Cambrian Explosion, and it remains one of the most dramatic moments in the history of the planet. In the space of just a few tens of millions of years, the oceans filled with animals. Not just any animals, bizarre, alien-looking creatures unlike anything alive today. Anomalocaris, a predator with circular jaws and grasping appendages, up to a meter long, the first apex predator the world had ever seen. Hallucigenia, a tiny worm-like thing walking on stilts with spines on its back. So strange that when scientists first found it, they reconstructed it upside down. Trilobites, armored and segmented, with compound eyes made of crystal, flooding the seafloor in their millions. In one burst of creativity, nature invented eyes, shells, claws, teeth, and the arms race between predator and prey that has been running ever since. But all of this was still underwater. The land remained empty, bare rock, no soil, no plants, no sound except the wind and the rain hitting stone. For millions of years after the Cambrian explosion, the continents were the most lifeless places on the planet. Silent, sterile deserts, surrounded by oceans teeming with life. Then, slowly, life began to creep ashore. First came the plants. Tiny, simple, hugging the ground near the water's edge. They had no roots, no leaves, no flowers, but they clung to the rock and they survived. And over millions of years they spread inland, breaking the stone beneath them into the first crude soil. Behind them came the fungi, quietly building the networks in the ground that would make forests possible. And then the animals followed. The first to walk on land were arthropods, ancestors of insects and spiders, small and cautious, breathing air for the first time. Then came the fish that crawled. Tiktaalik, with fins that worked like primitive legs, hauling itself out of shallow water onto the mud. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast, but it was the beginning of everything that would walk, run, and eventually stand upright on dry land. By the Devonian period, around 370 million years ago, the barren continents had been transformed. Vast forests of primitive trees covered the land, some towering 30 meters high. Giant insects filled the air. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a hawk's. Amphibians lumbered through the swamps. Life had conquered the land, and it was never going back. But the planet had a lesson it would teach over and over again. Every golden age ends, and the ending, when it came, was devastating. The history of life on Earth is not a steady climb upward. It is a series of rises and collapses. Golden ages shattered by catastrophes so severe they nearly ended everything. And the worst of them all came around 250 million years ago, at the end of the Permian period. It's called the Great Dying, and the name is earned. Roughly 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land species were wiped out. Not a bad year, not a rough century. Nearly everything on the planet gone. The cause was not an asteroid, it was the Earth itself. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia poured lava across an area the size of Europe and pumped so much carbon dioxide and toxic gas into the atmosphere that the climate spiraled out of control. The oceans warmed, lost their oxygen, and turned into stagnant, acidic dead zones. The land baked. The forests collapsed. Life came closer to total extinction than at any other point in its history. The world that emerged from the Great Dying was empty, shattered, a blank page. And into that emptiness stepped a group that would dominate the planet for the next 180 million years: the reptiles. First came the archosaurs, the ruling reptiles, the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and one very important branch that would become the most successful land animals in history: the dinosaurs. They didn't take over immediately. For millions of years after the Great Dying, they were small, marginal, living in the shadow of other reptilian competitors. But another extinction event, smaller but still devastating, cleared the stage around 201 million years ago. And this time, the dinosaurs were the ones left standing. What followed was the Jurassic period, and it was their world completely. Sauropods, the long-necked giants, grew to sizes that still defy belief. 30 meters long, 50 tons, the largest animals to ever walk the land, stripping entire forests and reshaping ecosystems with their appetites alone. Predators scaled up to match. Allosaurus, with its axe-like skull and blade teeth, ruling the food chain. Pterosaurs took to the air, some with wingspans wider than a small plane. The first feathered dinosaurs appeared, small and agile, ancestors of a lineage that would outlast them all. And beneath the feet of these giants, hiding in burrows and shadows, were tiny, insignificant, furred creatures that almost no one would have noticed. Mammals, waiting. Their time would come, but not for another 100 million years. The Cretaceous period was the grand finale of the age of dinosaurs. And it was spectacular. The world was warm. The continents were drifting toward their modern positions, and life was flourishing in forms that pushed the boundaries of what a living thing could be. Tyrannosaurus rex ruled the late Cretaceous of North America, the most powerful land predator the planet had ever produced. Triceratops armored itself with horns and a great bony shield. Ankylosaurus carried a tail club that could shatter the leg of anything foolish enough to attack it. In the skies, Quetzalcoatlus soared, a pterosaur the size of a giraffe when standing, with wings that stretched over 10 meters. In the oceans, Mosasaurus and other marine reptiles dominated, sleek and massive, the apex predators of the deep. And flowering plants, the angiosperms, quietly changed the world beneath everyone's feet. Flowers appeared, fruits evolved. Insects diversified to pollinate them. The partnership between flowers and their pollinators reshaped the land in ways that are still with us today. Every time you see a bee land on a blossom. This was the peak, the planet at full volume. And then, 66 million years ago, a rock the size of a mountain arrived from space and ended it all. We've told this story before. The asteroid, the fire, the darkness, the long dying winter. But what matters here is what came after. Because when the dust settled and the sun returned, the world was unrecognizable. The great dinosaurs were gone, the pterosaurs were gone, the marine reptiles were gone. 180 million years of dominance erased in a geological instant, but the tiny mammals survived, hidden in burrows, eating seeds and insects, small enough to need almost nothing. They crawled out into an empty world. And they did what life always does when the stage is cleared. They exploded. Within just a few million years, mammals diversified into an astonishing range of forms. The ancestors of whales returned to the sea. The first primates climbed into the trees. Horses, elephants, bats, and carnivores all trace their origins to this wild post-extinction radiation. The Eocene, around 50 million years ago, was a greenhouse paradise, warm from pole to pole, no ice anywhere, crocodiles basking at the Arctic. The planet was alive again, rebuilt from scratch, wearing a completely new face. And already, deep inside one lineage of tree-dwelling primates, the slow fuse was lit that would eventually lead to us. And if you've traveled this far with me, from a ball of molten rock through 4 billion years of fire, ice, extinction, and reinvention, then you already understand something most people never grasp. That the world you were born into is just the latest draft of a story that has been rewritten countless times. If you want to keep seeing the full picture, every lost world, every vanished era, every creature that ruled before us, then subscribe and come deeper, because we are only scratching the surface of what this planet has been. Now, let's bring this story home, because the final chapters are the ones that built the world outside your window. Around 34 million years ago, the long cooling began. Antarctica, cut off by ocean currents, froze. The great greenhouse faded. The ice returned. And the planet entered a new rhythm, the one it's still in today. Ice ages pulsed across the northern hemisphere, glaciers advancing and retreating in slow, grinding cycles. The world got colder, drier, harder, and the animals adapted. This was the age of megafauna. Woolly mammoths crossing the frozen steppe, sabre-toothed cats hunting in the shadows, giant ground sloths stripping trees in South America, cave bears and cave lions prowling Ice Age Europe. The world was colder, but it was far from empty. It was magnificent and brutal and teeming with giants. Meanwhile, in Africa, something was happening that would matter more than any ice sheet or megafauna. A lineage of primates had come down from the trees and started walking upright on 2 legs. They were not impressive. They were small, slow, clawless, and weak compared to almost everything around them. But they had 2 things no other animal on the planet possessed in the same combination: hands that could shape tools, and brains that could imagine things that didn't yet exist. These were our ancestors, and over the next few million years, they did something unprecedented. They made stone tools. They controlled fire. They developed language. They spread out of Africa in waves, walking into Europe, Asia, and eventually every habitable corner of the planet. They met the Neanderthals and, for a time, lived alongside them, and carried a piece of them forward in their DNA. And everywhere they went, the megafauna began to disappear. The mammoths, the giant sloths, the saber-tooths. One by one, across every continent, the great Ice Age animals vanished, some from climate change, some from hunting, most from a devastating combination of both. The last mammoth died on a remote island just 4,000 years ago, when the pyramids of Egypt were already standing. The age of giants ended not with an asteroid, but with us. So here you are, at the end of 4.5 billion years. You are sitting on a thin crust of cooled rock, floating on a mantle of slow-moving magma, orbiting a middle-aged star in an unremarkable corner of an ordinary galaxy. Beneath your feet is a planet that has been through more than you can possibly imagine. Born from collision, forged in fire, drowned in rain, frozen solid, boiled open, and struck from space. A planet that has invented life, destroyed it, and reinvented it so many times that the version you see outside your window is just the latest attempt in a very long series. Think about the scale of what you've just traveled through. The first single-celled life appeared around 3.8 billion years ago. Complex animals didn't show up until about 540 million years ago. Dinosaurs ruled for 180 million years. And our entire species, every civilization, every war, every song, every person you have ever heard of, fits inside the last 300,000 years. If you compressed Earth's history into a single 24-hour day, humans wouldn't appear until the final second before midnight. We are the newest thing on this planet, the latest experiment. And if 4.5 billion years of history teach you anything, it's that no experiment lasts forever. The trilobites didn't last. The dinosaurs didn't last. The mammoths didn't last. The Earth doesn't play favorites. It reshuffles, and whatever survives the next reshuffling gets to write the next chapter. But here's what makes our chapter different from every one that came before. We are the first species in this planet's entire 4.5 billion year history that can look back and understand the story. The trilobites never knew they were trilobites. The dinosaurs never knew they were living in the age of dinosaurs. But we know. We can dig up the bones, read the rocks, reconstruct the past, and see ourselves as what we truly are. One frame in a film that started long before us and will continue long after we're gone. That's not a small thing. That's extraordinary. Out of every living thing this planet has ever produced, every cell, every plant, every creature that has ever drawn breath, we are the only ones who stopped, looked back, and understood where we came from. 4.5 billion years of chaos, catastrophe, and reinvention. And at the very end of it, for the first time ever, the planet produced something that could appreciate the journey. That something is you. If this changed how you see the ground beneath your feet, follow the channel so you can keep traveling through the full history of our world with me. And share it with 5 people who've never heard the real story of the planet they live on. Then tell me in the comments, which chapter of Earth's history should we dive deeper into next? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next Lost World.